Astrology is the myths of the stars and planets, telling the themes and plots of our lives. These stories come to us daily through our satellite, the Moon. She is constantly spinning astro news. Hi, I'm Merrylin Leblanc with Moonwise. This coming week, on Tuesday, April 14th, the planet Mercury and the planetoid Chiron will be coming together in the sign of Aries. These two planets speak about our health, and so Daniel Fiverson is joining me today, and we decided we are going to talk about the health of the world from the perspective not only of these two planets, but other planets that we see as astrologers that brought about the pandemic that the world is in right now. So welcome to Moonwise, Daniel, and
thank you, Merrylin.
It's always good to have you here and stuff. What do you make of Mercury and Chiron together?
Well, it's an interesting combination. I get the first thought that comes to my mind is something that came from Barbara Hand Clow in her book about Chiron, where she actually wants to assign Chiron to the rulership of Virgo. So here we have an interesting compatibility because we all of us accept that Mercury is the ruler of Virgo, which is the health-oriented sign, and now here is Chiron, perhaps as the co-ruler. So it's an interesting combination. It's a very powerful combination of healing energies that have come together in this conjunction.
Yeah, but they're not together in Virgo either. They're together in Aries.
Well, but they still carry that. They're always going to be Virgo, but they're going to express it through an Aries archetype, if you would. They're wearing an Aries costume on the stage. They're still playing the same character of who they are. But I think that's a good segue into how this is all unfolding, because Aries is about the self. Aries is really about that instinctual, the instinct that just comes out of us, all by itself. Aries has no precognitive thought as to what it's going to do. It correlates to the ascendant in the chart, to the birth point. It's a very, very powerful initiation and exploratory archetype. Western astrology likes to assign Aries as something that we project. There's no actual projection. There's no cognition behind it. It's pure instinct. It's just something that just comes out of us by its own nature. And it's a very, very instinctual expression because Aries ruled by Mars relates back to Pluto in a sense. In terms of the desires of the soul, our karmic desires are carried deep within us through the outer planets, but they are all expressed through the inner planets. And in essence, Pluto says jump, Mars says how high. Mars is the determinant of the choices that we make, our behavior, what we actually act on. But it comes from a much deeper place.
Well, it's interesting you talk about it from a perspective of instinct because, I don't want to mislead listeners to think, well, I know people who are Aries suns, and what? There's no cognition there? There's plenty of cognition there. Matter of fact, the sign of Aries actually, from a bodily perspective, represents the brain, and there is intelligence there, there is cognition there, but you're talking about the basic. How that energy moves.
It's an impulsiveness.
Impulsively and instinctually.
Right. It's not necessarily thought out before it happens.
Yeah. And also just as a reminder, too, when we look at a chart of somebody, just because they were born when the sun was in Aries doesn't mean that they don't have other faculties working for them, and that's where we have to look at the whole chart. But I just wanted to make that clear distinction.
I think that's important. I think that's an important thing to note. But what that also tells us is that we have to dive a little deeper into this Aries. We know that it correlates to what's happening with Mars. And what is happening with Mars? It's conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. So all that Aquarian energy and that Saturnian energy is brought to bear on this conjunction. So what does that mean? I think that if we're going to kind of frame it, in a sentence or two, this is a 1-year cycle. The conjunctions occur annually. They're approximately
Mercury and Chiron.
And Chiron.
Right.
They advance approximately 3 to 4 degrees a year through the sign. This is the second conjunction in Aries. The first one was in 2019. So for the next year, we're going to be very consumed with discussions and thinking and exploration and understanding about what we need to do to heal this. What we need to do to find the remedies, and I believe that's the Aquarius part. We need to explore different modalities in terms of how this pandemic can first be flattened and then be planked. But Chiron is a homeopath. He's not, the brain surgeon necessarily. He's about alternative medicine. He's about holistic medicine. He's about finding the natural healing channels of the body, and not necessarily applying pharmaceuticals as an overlay to mask the symptoms or somehow eradicate whatever infection or malignancy is present, but rather to activate the natural healing of the body.
Right. When Chiron was discovered, and back in the 1970s, it was at that time that acupuncture, which is ancient, actually made it to the Western world.
Right.
And then chiropractic started to emerge and build and practice, and now even mainstream insurance companies cover chiropractics.
Right, chiropractic is this. It's the same word root for hand. The Greek word for hand, kairos. In essence, it's hands-on healing.
Well, one of the things about this energy in Aries that you talk about in terms of this instinct and just going wherever the desire and everything. One of the where Chiron shows up, often there's a problem. It might not be a health problem, but sometimes it is. But there's something to be dealt with, and many astrologers initially, when Chiron was discovered, referred to it as the wounded healer, because of the mythology behind Chiron as a centaur.
Right.
And what strikes me is, as it has begun, a year ago, its journey into Aries, that what we as a world, as a planet, Earthlings, we Earthlings, are having to face is the curtailing of our independence to go and do whatever we want to do.
Right. Our independence has been wounded.
Has definitely been wounded.
Right,
and with Mars in Aquarius now with Saturn, that also is a symbol. Mars and Saturn together is like stop and go. I mean, Mars is go, Saturn is stop, and it certainly is curtailing what our. I mean, it's obvious now. I mean, you go across town, you don't see very many cars like you used to. I'm sure the few people that have had airport experiences and flown places have said it's eerie.
Yeah, there was a woman who went to visit her mother who was dying yesterday. She was the only woman on the plane. Yeah. No, but also we have to all of these archetypes have more than one face, and I think it's very easy for us to categorize Saturn as boundaries and restrictions and suppressions and repressions. But we have to remember that first of all, it's a cardinal sign, and it's feminine. So there's a receptivity to it, and there's a generative quality to it as well. So it may create the limitations, but the limitations really are part of the effect of the shaping and the formation that's happening, because it's a growth. It's if you've ever seen slow time lapse photography of crystals growing under a microscope, that's Saturn. There's a slow, steady structure that's built, each shape, as a fractal of itself, it just keeps forming and expanding.
Yeah, well, Saturn is, the opposite. Like you say, it rules Capricorn, which is the opposite of Cancer, which is ruled by the moon. I've often referred to the moon as personal security and Saturn as social security. Okay. And when it comes to social security, there's still a definition.
Right.
There's still a limitation, but it's huge.
Right.
And it often is flexible, too. It's like breathing. It can expand itself when needed, and it contracts when not needed.
It's consensus.
Yeah.
Saturn is consensus, clearly. So, and so if Chiron, is not just where we're wounded, but Chiron also can be the wounder. It can play both roles. And the other face that I think is interesting to recognize about Mercury is that Mercury over time evolved from Hermes to Mercury to Hermes Trismegistus in the Hellenistic period as the alchemist, as the magician. So there is this potential also for alchemy, for the transformation from what is base into something that is worth, of great value. And to a great degree, I sense that that's, maybe an interesting or more accurate overlay of the time that we're passing through, because we are faced with base, difficult, toxic issues of, it's dark, it's very dark. But yet this lead can be transformed into gold. It can be transformed into something that's much greater than the experience that we're having now and have had up until this time. And it holds that potential. Again, I don't think it's going to play out in 12 months, just in this single transit. But over the next 10 years or so, as these conjunctions repeat in Aries and finally complete in this zodiacal sign, we will have, to a great degree, perhaps healed some of the selfishness in the world, Aries, some of the self-centeredness, some of the impulsiveness, some of the need to just get ahead of everybody else. The hyper individuality.
Well, it's interesting because what you're making me do is think about the sign of Aries and its decadence, and the last 10 degrees are really reflective of also Sagittarian energy. So there is this kind of group consciousness that comes, and the very last degree of Aries is a duck and a brood, on a pond. And it's sort of a reminder that even though that sign is so self-focused, that they're not alone.
Yeah, exactly. We're not alone. Each of it, there's really, I think it's Leslie Nathanson who coined this phrase. Who's a local astrologer here in town, therapist and astrologer. She said, "There's really only one of us on the planet." It kind of, it's an extrapolation of a colony of ants or bees or, other species where the entire community functions as a single organism. Facebook, is often filled with these images of flocks of birds flying around in these unbelievable formations, like synchronized flyers, and the same thing with fish in the ocean, where it's a single being. Yet there may be a million of them in that cluster.
Yeah, and they don't spend hours practicing that synchronization.
Exactly.
Like
right.
we humans. It makes us wonder about, I've had many a conversation lately about, we're not the most intelligent beings on this planet. Anyway, you're listening to Moonwise here on KSFR 101.1 FM. I'm Merrylin Leblanc with my guest Daniel Fiverson. We've been talking about Mercury and Chiron coming together this week on Tuesday the 14th in the sign of Aries. It's time for the Moon Minute and a message from the station. If you're streaming at ksfr.org, don't forget you can always support KSFR by making a secure contribution online, or you can call KSFR during the week on business hours, 428-1528, and make a secure contribution as well. You can always listen to podcasts of Moonwise and other shows, too, on ksfr.org. Here's the Moon Minute. Daniel and myself will be back shortly. Welcome back to Moonwise. I'm Merrylin LeBlanc with my guest Daniel Fiverson. Today we've been talking, of course, about, the epidemic in a way, about illness and about health, primarily because the planet Mercury is meeting up this coming week on Tuesday the 14th with the planetoid Chiron. Now, these two bodies, Mercury is one that's very, matter of fact, it's inferior to the Earth as far as its orbit around the Sun. So it goes through all the signs of the zodiac within a year's period, but Chiron, it takes 50 years to revolve around the Sun, and it does it in a very irregular, elliptical manner, sort of like Pluto does. Sometimes it spends 12 or more years in a sign, and sometimes it only spends like 5 years in a sign. So it's irregular in that regard. But the fact that this is a common meeting of these two bodies, it happens yearly, doesn't necessarily mean that it is a major player. It is a player, and an important one, in bringing about a pandemic such as we have. We've talked a little bit about this on some previous shows here, but not with you, Daniel. I mean, how do you actually see the pandemic from a larger scale?
Well, I think we have to go back to what's been happening really for a longer period of time than just this conjunction. One of the major astrological events of last year and this year, the half of last year and a good portion of this year, is the position of Chiron in a square, a 90-degree angle to the lunar nodes. And what that opens up is a whole discussion of destiny. It opens up a discussion of the actual karmic axis, the evolutionary trajectory from past to future. And Chiron has been pressuring that axis for months and will continue to do so. It's moving, it's separating from the perfection to the square. It's at 6 degrees. The nodes are now at 1. The nodes are actually in a couple of weeks are going to move into Gemini and Sagittarius, which will change the whole flavor. But the point being is that this wounding situation, this health situation, has been part of our consciousness, but our subconsciousness for a while. It's been a major player just in terms of the way that this year is unfolding, and the fact that it's the nodes is what I want to bring our attention to. That what we're going through with Mercury now coming to this square, this nodal square, is that this is brings in fate and destiny. This is bigger than just this day-to-day stuff. What the sun and moon and what's going on. This is a long-term shift that's occurring. And the shift is clearly about consciousness about ourselves, of being more self-aware and of recognizing really what our own needs are in terms of self-care, taking care of our own health. We live in a fix-me culture. We feel that we can eat whatever we want, and then we can go take a cholesterol pill, or we can go on a keto diet, or we can, do something. We can go to the doctor. The doctor will fix us if we get sick. We are reactive in terms of our health, and Chiron is about proactive health. And now in the sign of Aries, it's going to be about taking responsibility. Capricorn is the South Node. It is about taking responsibility for our own health, that we can't hand it off to somebody else. The doctors in New York are saying that this is worse than 9/11. That the influx of patients and the mortality rate and just the pressure of what's happening, because 9/11 was one day. They had a finite number of injuries. They all came in. This is an ongoing thing that we're running out of medical supplies. It's much, much, much bigger than what happened in 2001. But yet it's having the same effect on us to a great degree. And that effect is bringing community together. It's interesting that we're being brought together, digitally, in cyberspace, because we're all self-quarantined. But it's
even the astrology says this, because, the Chiron squaring the nodes is creating what we call a T-square. And the space opposite Chiron is in the sign of Libra, and there's no major planet there right now. And so consequently, but whenever you have T-squares in charts, you want to look for the planet that's being squared by both the other two, the north and the south in this case. You want to look opposite it. And that's where the relief can be found. And the relief is in Libra. And what is Libra about? Being together,
right.
Being in partnership. And it's interesting that, the media has adopted this phrase and has put spots out there in one of the major stations, because I go surfing, and I don't have cable. So anyway, but they'll say, we're all in this together.
Right.
We're all in this together. And that's a very Libra phrase.
Well, the other thing that raises is, Mercury, third house, is also about brothers and sisters. It's about our siblings. And I think that part of this awareness that's happening is to recognize that we're all brothers and sisters, to recognize the importance of brotherhood and sisterhood in the world. And
that's an Aquarian trait as well.
That's a totally Aquarian trait, right.
Where we've referred to Mars, the planet ruling Aries, is being in Aquarius right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's this whole great, wonderful thing. One of the things, I didn't bring the book with me, but there's a German, and I'm not sure if he's still alive. His last name is Ebertin. He was very big in Uranian astrology, or cosmobiology, they called it, where they only look at the aspects among the planets and the harmonics especially. Mm-hmm. And he wrote this whole book because he's looked at health issues a lot from this perspective. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't talk about planets so much in terms of pandemics. But in the book he does say that when we do have these pandemics, we usually see those planetary energies that have longer cycles. And this is like from Jupiter on out. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And I know in some books they'll say, well, Pluto is definitely having to deal with diseases that are pandemics. And so I think a lot of this goes back to the heavy load that has been and still is in Capricorn, when most of these planets except for Mercury and Chiron that we mentioned on the side have been moving through Capricorn, right. And now two of them in Aquarius, although Saturn will move back into Capricorn for a while. And when things are out of balance in the world, when we're not in harmony, and I don't mean just with each other as human beings, but with everything here on the planet.
There's a lot that's out of balance. And to a great degree, it's possible that from a spiritual perspective, this pandemic is the cause of all the energetic imbalances on the planet. and that it actually is showing up physically in our world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I may have said this in another show recently, too, is that there are some that have looked at the disturbance of the bats, say, in China, by, the whole development of land and factories and the treatment of the environment with chemicals, et cetera, that in fact have, disturbed the bats and taken them out of their environment and bringing with them viruses. Mm-hmm. All the coronaviruses are bat viruses. And so, yes, I mean, it starts with humanity's treatment of Mother Earth.
The other thought that comes to mind is that the reason that it's so difficult, just to back up a minute, under normal circumstances, it takes about a year to develop a vaccine and test it before it's actually ready to be put, into the marketplace. The problem that has arisen with COVID-19 is that it has already mutated 9 times. There are 9 different versions of COVID-19 in circulation. So a single vaccine may not necessarily address all of them. And what comes to mind is that's Mercury. I mean, Mercury is just such quicksilver. That's the mutation. With Chiron, that it's it's just this ongoing process of literally the evolution of the germ. The other thing about Chiron, you talked about his orbit. His orbit's really unusual because he spends part of his time out beyond Uranus, and then he comes back in and he's within the orbit of Saturn. And again, Barbara Hand Cloud called him the Rainbow Bridge that actually synthesized the Uranian and the Saturnian energies and unified them. And that's also an Aquarian concept, because before we had Uranus, we had Saturn as the ruler. So all of these archetypes are definitely fundamental to what's happening.
Right. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for being my guest today. If people want to get in touch with you, they can at
the number 4 evolutionaryastrology.com.
Well, all of you out there, stay healthy, stay well.
Stay with us.
Stay with us, but keep your distance. Right. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with more on Moonwise. Coming up next is Climate One. This is KSFR, White Rock, Santa Fe Public Radio.